So, if your nonprofit raises funds in California, you already know it's a critical state for fundraising. But its rules, well, they're different from anywhere else. Today, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about charitable solicitation registration in the Golden State. We're here to unpack these complex topics in practical terms for nonprofit leaders and their finance teams, and this resource is provided by our friends over at Ironwood Registrations. You know, a lot of nonprofits assume that getting federal tax-exempt status is some kind of golden ticket to fundraise anywhere in the country. But as you're about to see, that's a really common and potentially costly mistake. The reality is, most states have their own distinct fundraising regulations. California, though, is truly in a league of its own. It has some of the most comprehensive and, frankly, unique rules in the entire nation. So if your nonprofit has any kind of financial connection to California, this is absolutely essential information.
All right, let's dive right in. In California, fundraising is regulated by the Attorney General's office, specifically its Registry of Charities and Fundraisers. And the very first thing you have to understand is what actually triggers their oversight, because it's fundamentally different from pretty much every other state.
And here it is, the core distinction. In most states, the requirement to register is triggered when you solicit donations. You know, when you ask for money. But in California, the trigger is when your nonprofit actually receives money or property. That's a crucial difference, and it has some pretty significant implications.
So how do you know if this applies to your organization? Let's take a look at the specific conditions that would require a nonprofit to register in California.
Your nonprofit has to register if it meets any of these three conditions. First, if you receive charitable funds that are connected to the state. Second, if you hold any charitable assets there. Or third, if you're considered to be doing business in California. So what does doing business actually mean for a nonprofit? Well, it's a very broad definition. It can include actively soliciting donations, sure, but also things like maintaining an office, having employees, conducting your programs there, or even just holding board meetings in the state. Okay, let's get practical. If you've figured out that, yes, you do need to register, what are the first steps you need to take for that initial filing? First thing to know, the deadline is tight. I mean, really tight. Organizations have to file their initial registration within just 30 days of receiving their first charitable assets. And what does it cost to get started? The initial filing fee for this registration is a flat $50. You'll also need to get a packet of core documents together, so be prepared to provide your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your IRS determination letter, a current list of all your officers and directors, and if you have it, your initial IRS Form 1023 or 1024 application. Now, what if your nonprofit isn't actually incorporated in California? Well, there are a couple of additional and totally separate requirements you really need to be aware of. And it's so important to understand that these are separate filings with completely different agencies. You might need to qualify to do business with the Secretary of State. That's a corporate law thing. Separately, you might also need to get state tax-exempt status from the Franchise Tax Board to avoid state income tax. And these are all in addition to your registration with the Attorney General. Getting registered is really just the first step. To stay in good standing, you have to maintain that registration through annual filings. So let's look at those ongoing requirements. Your annual filing is due 4.5 months after your fiscal year ends. Now, the good news here is that if you file for a federal extension with the IRS, California typically grants you an automatic 6-month extension for this report as well. So for the annual renewal, you'll need to submit your latest IRS Form 990, provide financial info for the most recent fiscal year, report any changes in your leadership, and pay the filing fee, which is on a sliding scale that's based on your total revenue. And you do not want to let this slide. The consequences for failing to file are serious. We're talking about financial penalties, suspension of your right to operate, and even the potential loss of your state tax-exempt status. So, does absolutely everyone have to do this? Well, not quite. California does provide exemptions for certain types of organizations, and there's one notable exception that's really important to understand. The main categories of organizations that are exempt include religious organizations, accredited educational institutions, nonprofit hospitals, and various governmental entities. And here it is. This might be the most important thing to remember. Unlike many other states, California does not provide a small charity exemption. What does that mean? It means even if your organization only receives a tiny amount of money in the state, you may still be required to register. So what does this all mean for your bigger national fundraising strategy? Look, California has one of the largest donor populations out there, so you can't just ignore it. But you absolutely have to account for its unique receiving-based model, which, again, is so different from the soliciting-based approach you see almost everywhere else. At the end of the day, California's rules are all about promoting transparency and public trust. By understanding that the trigger for registration is receiving funds, not just asking for them, your nonprofit can properly review its obligations and make sure it stays fully compliant.
Navigating these requirements in California, and really across all 50 states, can be a huge challenge. If your organization needs help managing this complex process, Ironwood Registrations specializes in this exact kind of work. You can learn more and request some help at ironwoodregistrations.com.